Guys, this is Professor LeBron. I'm going to be going through Unit 5, Landscapes, Lesson 5, Wind and Wave. This is for your Tuesday lesson. All right, so our learning target is I can describe the interactions between the wind, the land, and the sea. All right, and just to recap, there are also notes that go along with these slides. You'll have your notes attached to your assignment for this week. All right, it's the same format where you write in the read words and answer video questions if needed. And there's always our check for understanding that you will complete at the end of the lesson. All right, so let's get started. All right, so let's stop and think for a second. How could a place like this be formed? Okay, so how can this rock be changed and formed in this way? Take a second, think about it. All right, so I think perhaps maybe something like erosion or the wave action, perhaps from the ocean, maybe change this rock formation here. All right, so we're going to get into how places like this can form. All right, next slide. All right, so some of the ways these rocks and oceans can affect beaches are through things like physical or mechanical weathering. All right, so physical or mechanical weathering changes the rock size or shape without changing the actual chemical composition. So it doesn't change the rock chemically, it just breaks it down or changes the shape. There are 5 ways that this can happen. We have the first 3 underneath here. All right, so the first type of physical weathering could be thermal. So repeated heating or one-time events and cooling cause rock layers to split and crack. All right, so if you have repeated heat or repeated cooling, this causes rock layers to split and crack. You may have noticed thermal type of weathering in the sidewalk. When it is winter and ice gets in between the cracks, it causes the sidewalk to break over time if this continually happens. Same thing for rock or earth formations. Okay, a second way, which I kind of talked about already, is frost or ice. Okay, so when ice freezes in the cracks of the rocks, it expands, and this causes more cracks and openings in rocks. Our third type of physical weathering is pressure release. So when overlying rocks or sediments are removed, the rocks that had a large weight on top of them expand and break. So when that weight is removed, those rocks underneath them will expand and break because there has been a pressure change. All right, so just to recap, you are writing down these words in red. You're filling them in your notes here. All right, so we've gone over the first 3 physical weathering causes. Now we're going to jump back to the last 2. All right, so another way that things can be, or rocks can be physically weathered is through plant roots or animals. So organisms, whether they be plants or animals, interacting with the rocks can cause breaks or cracks in the rocks. So for example, if we have a tree and its roots go through part of a rock, that rock can be broken or can develop a crack. And the 5th way things can be physically weathered is through abrasion. So when gravity, running water, or glaciers bounce, slide, or scrape against rocks, they can break the rocks down. Okay, and just to reiterate, you are copying down the words in red in your notes. All right, so we've talked about physical weathering. All right, this is just changing the size or shape of the rock without doing any damage to the chemical composition. Now we're going to talk about what happens with chemical weathering. Okay, so chemical weathering is a natural process or processes that occur under certain conditions at the Earth's surface, and they form new compounds. So chemical weathering changes the composition of the rock. So it changes the chemical combinations there, and you'll see it below. So for number one type of chemical weathering is when you have iron and oxygen combined, they produce this thing called rust. Right, and that's sort of like an orangey, reddish compound. You've probably seen this on any sort of metals that you've left outside in a humid environment. They start to get a bit rusty. And two, another way chemical weathering can happen is through acid rain. When acid rain reacts with limestone, it produces this thing called calcium. All right, and this changes the composition of the rock. So again, make sure that you're writing these words in red in your notes here. All right, moving on. Okay, so we have a few things that can affect weathering. Okay, like there's certain things that affect how weathered certain rocks become. All right, so our first one is hardness. So the harder the minerals in the rock are, the more resistant that rock is to weathering. Remember, if you want to kind of review the hardness of different minerals, it is on the last page of your reference table. So the more hard the minerals are, the more resistant that type of rock is to weathering. All right, another thing that's affected by weathering is surface area. Okay, so the more a rock is exposed to the elements, the greater the weathering. So if a rock is more exposed to wind, water, or other types of things that cause weathering, the more likely it is to be weathered or eroded. All right, another thing that affects weathering is length. So rocks that are exposed to the atmosphere for longer periods of time show greater amounts of weathering. All right, and one of the final things that can affect weathering is the type of climate there is. All right, whether it's hot or cold. So for our point here, physical weathering or weathering that changes the shape or the size of the rock happens more in cold climates. Okay, so physical weathering happens more in cold climates. Chemical weathering, where we're now changing the composition of the rock, the chemical composition, that is more common in warm climates. All right, we have more changes in temperature and there's more rainfall patterns. So it's more humid, there's a lot of moisture. Warm climates are more impacted by chemical weathering. Right, so the rocks in warm climates are more affected by chemical weathering, and the rocks that are in cold climates are more affected by physical weathering. And it's a key thing to remember. All right, so please ensure that you are writing the words in red in your notes so you can refer back to this later. All right, so we have a couple agents of erosion, or four things that can cause erosion. So we have wind, water, ice, and gravity. All right, so wind erosion This is where the wind is literally just eroding away sand, rock, etc. Okay, so wind erosion is most common in arid or dry climates and along shorelines. All right, so wind erosion is more common in dry climates like the desert and along the beach. All right, take a moment to write this in your notes. All right, so let's stop and think for a second. Let's say the quarantine is over. Everything's okay. We can go to the beach now. All right, so when you go to the beach, when do you notice there are more waves? When it's windy or when it's a calm day with no wind? What do you think? Why do you think that is? Hey, I've noticed that the waves tend to be a little bit more rough when it is a more windy day. We're going to go into why that may be. All right, so we're going to go into some factors or some things that determine the size of ocean waves. Okay, so ocean waves form when wind blows over the surface of the water and transfers that energy to the water. Okay, so the energy from the wind is transferred into the water. All right, there are three things that determine the size of these ocean waves. One is the speed of the wind. Two is the length of time that the wind is blowing. And three is the distance that the wind blows. Okay, so take a moment and write this down. Write down the words in red in your notes. All right, we should be on to the second page. All right, so now we're going to talk about how wave erosion creates different landforms. All right, so our first type of wave erosion landform is wave cut cliffs. All right, if we look at this picture down here, these are wave cut cliffs. These form when the waves erode a rocky shoreline and create a vertical wall of exposed rock. Okay, so the waves continually hit this rocky shoreline. It erodes some of the rock, and now we have a vertical wall of exposed rock here. All right, now we're going to go on to our second type of landform. Okay, our second type of wave erosion landform are sea arches. All right, these sea arches can be seen around the world. There are quite a few in the Amalfi Coast, which is in Italy. There used to be one in Puerto Rico, just similar to this, but the earthquake that was there in January destroyed that sea arch. Anyway, the way these form is when waves erode both sides of a cliff, and this erosion creates a hole in the cliff seen here. All right, so waves continually are hitting both sides of this cliff. They erode away the rock in the middle, and we have this hole here. All right, our third type of wave erosion landform are sea stacks. All right, shown here. I'm not sure which part of the world this is, but looks pretty cool. Anyway, the way these sea stacks form is when waves erode the top of the sea arch, leaving only the pillars of rock. So what happens for sea stacks is the waves, I'm going to jump back to this, in order to get the sea stacks instead of the sea arch, the waves erode this here, leaving just the stack of rock as shown in this picture. Okay, so sea stacks start originally with a sea arch, the waves erode the top, and then we're left with just these pillars here. All right, so make sure you're writing down the words in red in your notes. All right, so we've talked about wave erosion. Okay, we know it's eroding this rock and soil and or other sediments. Okay, so now where do all the sediments that get eroded by these waves go? All right, so we've eroded all these different landforms, sediments are gone. These sediments that are carried by the waves, where do they go? Any thoughts? Then they go back to the shoreline? We're about to find out. All right, so now we're going to talk about wave deposition, okay, or what the waves are depositing. So what do they do with this sediment? Number one, we get beaches, okay? So waves will deposit sediment back onto the shore, creating these beaches that we like to go to in the summer. All right, so beaches are calm areas along the shore where sand gets deposited. All right, that's one of the things waves deposit. Next, we have this thing called longshore drift. All right, I'm going to explain kind of what this diagram is showing on the side and what all this means. Okay, so in longshore drift, waves strike the shore at an angle, causing sediments to move along the shoreline. Okay, so here we see that the waves are hitting in a certain pattern, it's hitting sort of a little bit perpendicular. They're not perpendicular, they're hitting at an angle. I'm sorry. So they hit at a certain angle, and that causes the sand to be moved down the shoreline. Okay, so once these waves hit the shore, the water in the waves move straight back off the shore, and it carries the sediment with them. All right, the sediment gets picked up again at an angle, and this process continues. All right, so basically the waves hit the beach at a certain angle, and that angle causes the sand to drift across, as you see here. All right, it's moved over a couple spaces over, depending on how intense the wave action is. So basically in longshore drift, the waves carry the sand down the beach. All right, so we're going to see this in action here. This is something that's kind of hard to conceptualize without seeing a video. So here are the 4 video questions that go with this video here. All right, number 1, for longshore drift to occur, how must the waves be hitting the beach? 2, what causes the backwash to pull the sand straight back? 3, how does the sand move over time? And 4, what do people build to stop this longshore drift from moving the beach? All right, so these questions are in your notes. You're going to respond to them in your notes. All right, you're going to click the video, respond to the questions, and then we're going to keep moving on. All right, so we have 3 landforms that are deposited by waves. All right, so we have 1, Spitz, which is shown here. Kind of have this elongated beach area. 2, we have sandbars. And 3, we have barrier islands, like this. All right, so these are 3 landforms that are deposited by waves: spits, sandbars, and barrier islands. All right, so wave erosion can affect people, as seen in this picture. All right, the wave eroded the land here, and this house is literally hanging on the edge. All right, so how do we protect this shoreline when we're dealing with waves eroding away the shores or the beach? All right, so one of the things that we can do to protect the shoreline is have breakwaters. So breakwaters are an artificial barrier island that are built to protect the shoreline from waves. All right, so if you see here, people built these breakwaters here, and this helps protect the shoreline from longshore drift or other types of wave erosion. Another thing you can do to protect shorelines is build these things called groins. Okay, I've seen these before. I didn't know that they were called this. But this wall of rock or concrete that juts into the ocean perpendicular to the beach, so it's at a 90-degree angle to the beach. This wall of rock or concrete helps to stop the waves from moving along the beach. Okay? So again, be sure to write the words in red in your notes. And that is the end of the lesson. So once you've finished filling in your notes, answering the video questions, you're going to jump to your Check for Understanding Google form. Okay, it looks like this. There are 5 Check for Understanding questions. And that's it. That's it for our lesson that's due on Tuesday.